At first glance, victory in battle is always the result of bravery, strength, and luck. We are accustomed to thinking of the Romans as fearless warriors who defeated their enemies through courage and discipline. But behind this heroic image lies something more fundamental and prosaic: calculation and precise analysis. The Romans did not rely on chance, they relied on mathematics. They turned warfare into an exact science where every detail mattered. That is why 5,000 legionnaires could hold back 50,000 enemy soldiers. They knew how to use the terrain, how to build fortifications, how to distribute their forces. Their secret was not in the strength of their swords, but in the accuracy of their calculations. This is the story of how Roman engineers and commanders won battles before they even began. Watch the video to the end to find out how the mathematics of the camp saved the legions from destruction. A Roman military camp, or castrum, was not just a place to spend the night. It was a temporary fortress built according to strict rules. Its shape was always square or rectangular, which made it convenient for defense and planning. This shape allowed the Romans to quickly erect fortifications, calculate the perimeter, and deploy troops. The camp always had its entrance facing the enemy. The construction of the camp began with the determination of its center. From there, two main streets were laid out, dividing the camp into 4 parts. It was like a miniature Roman city with its own streets, squares, and gates. Each legion and cohort had its own strictly designated place. Everything was calculated down to the smallest detail. The camp construction system was so refined that it took only a few hours to build, even if it was designed for several legions. The process began with the arrival of the vanguard, which consisted of engineers and experienced centurions. Their task was to choose a suitable location that had access to water and was protected from unexpected attacks. They used special tools to determine the flatness of the terrain and calculate the perimeter. Once the location was chosen, the engineers marked out the main streets, the Cardo and the Decumanus. They intersected in the center of the camp, forming the main square, the Forum. From there, the rest of the streets were marked out, dividing the camp into equal parts. This was done so that each unit had its own strictly designated place. The tents were set up in a specific order, and each legionnaire knew where his centuria was located. The commander's tents were located in the center of the camp, as well as the hospital and warehouses with provisions and weapons. These buildings were the most important, so they were located in the most protected part of the camp. This ensured their safety and quick access to them in case of need. The construction of the camp was not only a matter of security, but also of discipline. Each legionnaire knew his task, and no one could disobey an order. This discipline was the key to success. Without it, the camp would have turned into a chaotic crowd of people that could not withstand an enemy attack. The camp also served as a place for training and rest. Legionnaires trained every day to maintain their physical fitness. They also rested, played games, and socialized with each other. This was important for maintaining their morale. Commanders, knowing this, gave them time for rest and recreation. Ultimately, the Roman camp was a symbol of their superiority. It was not just a place to sleep, but a full-fledged, temporary fortress that could withstand any attack. It was proof that the Romans understood the importance of planning and discipline. What part of building the camp do you think was the most difficult and dangerous for the legionaries? Share your thoughts in the comments. The camp's defensive structures were its main protection. The perimeter of the camp was surrounded by an earthen rampart, an ager, and a moat, a fosse. The moat was dug with shovels that each legionnaire carried with him. The depth and width of the moat were strictly regulated to make it difficult for the enemy to cross. The earth dug out of the moat was used to build the rampart. At the top of the rampart, a palisade was erected, a fence made of wooden stakes. These stakes were sharpened and pointed towards the enemy, making them dangerous for attackers. The stakes were very sharp, allowing them to inflict damage. This entire system of fortifications was so effective that even a large enemy force could not overcome it. The construction of these fortifications was a daily routine for the legionaries. It was hard work, but it was vital for their survival. In addition to their weapons and armor, Each soldier carried tools for digging and building. This was part of their equipment, and they had to know how to use them. The moat or fossa was not just a pit. It had a special shape that made it difficult for the enemy to cross. The moat could be several meters deep, and its walls were sloped, making them slippery. Sometimes sharp stakes were inserted into the bottom of the moat to cause damage. This moat was the first obstacle the enemy had to overcome. The earthen rampart, or ager, was the second line of defense. It was built from earth dug out of the moat. The rampart was high enough for legionnaires to throw spears and arrows at the enemy from it. At the top of the rampart, a palisade was erected, a fence made of wooden stakes. These stakes were very sharp and pointed toward the enemy. The legionnaires carried them with them. Each soldier carried several stakes. The construction of the camp was a collective effort, and everyone participated in it. The troops were divided into groups, and each group was responsible for its own section. This system worked smoothly, like clockwork. Experienced centurions supervised the work and gave instructions. This allowed the Romans to build their fortifications quickly and efficiently. In addition to the moat and rampart, the camp also had 4 gates. These gates were reinforced with towers and protected from attack. The gates were the only entrance and exit from the camp, and they were carefully guarded. Each legionnaire had his own duty in defending the gates. This entire system of fortifications was part of Roman military philosophy. The Romans did not rely on chance, but always prepared for the worst. They knew that in wartime, survival was paramount. Their camps were impregnable fortresses that gave them an advantage. They allowed them to rest and recuperate while the enemy was forced to stand at the gates. Thus, Roman fortifications were not only physical protection, but also a psychological weapon. They had an oppressive effect on enemies, and many of them retreated without even attempting an assault. This was proof that the Romans understood the importance of not only strength, but also intelligence. And if the Romans could build such fortifications in just a few hours, what made them so invincible in battle? Watch the video to the end to find out the answer to this question. The Romans understood that even the strongest warrior cannot fight forever. Fatigue and overexertion could make him vulnerable. Therefore, the Roman army had a rotation system that allowed it to constantly keep fresh forces in the ranks. This was especially important in defending the camp. When the enemy stormed the fortifications, only some of the legionaries were on the ramparts. The rest were inside the camp, ready to come to the rescue at any moment. When the front lines got tired, they were replaced by fresh soldiers. This allowed the Romans to withstand long sieges and repel waves of attacks. The rotation system was also used in battle. When the first line of legionaries got tired, they would retreat, and the second line would take their place. It was like a living conveyor belt that allowed the Romans to constantly press down on the enemy. This tactic was very effective and brought victory to the Romans. The rotation system was a key element of Roman tactics, which made their army virtually tireless. In battle, the legion was formed into 3 lines: Hastati, Principes, and Triarii. The Hastati, the youngest and most energetic warriors, began the battle. When they got tired, they were replaced by the Principals, who were more experienced warriors. The Triarii, the veterans, only entered the battle at the most crucial moment. This allowed the Romans to conserve their strength and always have fresh warriors in reserve, which was vital in long battles. Rotation was also used in the defense of the camp. During a siege, the enemy could attack without interruption, but the Romans knew how to deal with this. They divided the defense of the camp into sectors, and each sector was guarded by a separate centuria. The sentries replaced each other at regular intervals. This allowed the soldiers to rest, eat, and regain their strength. Thus, there were always fresh and rested warriors on the ramparts, ready for battle. This system was very effective. It allowed the Romans to withstand long sieges and repel waves of attacks that could last for several days. Rome's enemies could not understand how the Romans could fight for so long. They thought that the Romans possessed some kind of supernatural endurance, but in reality it was simply a well-organized tactic. The rotation system was also used for patrolling. At night, legionnaires patrolled the perimeter of the camp. Patrols replaced each other every few hours. This ensured the safety of the camp and prevented unexpected enemy attacks. If the same people were on patrol, they would get tired and lose their vigilance. This system was so effective that it was also used in peacetime. Legionnaires trained to perfect this tactic. They practiced changing positions, marching, and other maneuvers. This discipline was the key to their success. Without it, they would not have been able to fight so effectively. Rotation also had a psychological effect. The enemy saw that the Romans never tired. This demoralized them and forced them to retreat. They understood that they were facing not just an army, but a well-organized military machine that was impossible to defeat. Ultimately, the rotation system was what made the Roman army so powerful. It was proof that the Romans understood the importance of not only strength, but also intelligence. They were the first to turn war into a precise science, where every element mattered. And that was what brought them victory. The Romans used not only force, but also psychological pressure. Their fortifications were so impressive that enemies often retreated without even attempting an assault. The sight of thousands of legionaries quickly and efficiently building a fortress had a depressing effect on their enemies. They understood that they were facing not just an army, but a well-organized military machine. The Romans also used tricks to defend their camp. They could leave the gates open to lure the enemy inside and then surround them. They could also set up ambushes using the features of the terrain. All this was part of their tactics, which allowed them to defeat the enemy, even if they were outnumbered. The Romans were masters of psychological warfare. Their strategy began long before the first clash. Even on the march, they tried to impress the locals and their enemies. Strict discipline, perfect formation, uniform equipment, all this spoke of strength and order. Unlike many barbarian tribes who fought chaotically, the Romans looked like a single, invincible organism. This image was a powerful weapon in itself. When a legion set up camp, its construction was not just a routine task, but a demonstration of strength. The speed and coordination with which thousands of soldiers dug trenches, erected ramparts, and pitched tents were astonishing. Imagine how the enemy viewed this. They saw the field turn into an impregnable fortress before their eyes. This deprived them of any hope of a surprise attack and made them doubt their own strength. Often, enemies preferred to retreat without engaging in battle because they understood that storming such a fortress would not bring them victory. The Romans also knew how to use the terrain to their advantage. They could choose a place for their camp that was on high ground or protected by a river. This gave them an advantage and made the enemy's task more difficult. In some cases, they could deliberately leave one direction less protected to lure the enemy into a trap. It was like a game of chess where every move was thought out in detail. The Romans also used sounds to defend their camp. The signals of trumpets and horns, which sounded in a specific order, were not just commands, but part of psychological warfare. They created a sense of organization and order, which was extremely important for maintaining the morale of the legionaries, and had a depressing effect on the enemies. The enemies heard these sounds and understood that the Roman army was not sleeping, that it was always on guard. The Romans also used various tactical tricks. For example, they could stage false retreats to lure the enemy into an ambush, or they could use screens to hide their forces and attack the enemy from the flank. All these tricks were part of their tactics, which allowed them to defeat enemies even when they were outnumbered. Thus, the Romans used not only force, but also intelligence. They turned warfare into a precise science where every element mattered. They understood that the main thing in war was not to defeat the enemy, but to prevent the enemy from defeating them. And that was what brought them victory. And if the Romans could play with the enemy's psyche so masterfully, what happened when their beloved pilum came into play? Let's talk about it right now. The Roman pilum, or throwing spear, was not just a weapon, it was a weapon of mass destruction. Legionnaires carried several pilums with them. Before the battle began, they threw them at the enemy. The pilum was specially designed so that it could not be reused. After being thrown, the tip bent, and the enemy could not throw it back. A mass volley of pilums could thin out the enemy's ranks before they even reached hand-to-hand combat. It was a very effective weapon that allowed the Romans to inflict damage from a distance. If a pilum hit a shield, it would bend, making the shield heavy and useless. The enemy was forced to drop it, which made them vulnerable. The pilum was the pinnacle of Roman engineering. It consisted of two parts, a wooden shaft and a long metal rod with a tip. The rod was connected to the shaft with several rivets. One of them was made of wood and the other was made of iron. When the pilum hit the target, the wooden rivet broke and the rod bent. This made the pilum useless to the enemy. Before the battle, the legionaries lined up in several lines. The first line threw their pilums and then moved into close combat. The second and third lines followed them, throwing their pilums. This tactic was very effective. It allowed the Romans to inflict damage on the enemy before they got close. A mass volley of pilums was very powerful. Hundreds of spears flew towards the enemy, creating a veritable hailstorm. It was not only a physical weapon, but also a psychological one. Enemies who did not expect such an attack were thrown into confusion. They lost their formation and morale. This gave the Romans an advantage. Commanders made sure that legionaries used their pilums correctly. They taught them how to throw them properly so that they would reach their target. This was part of their training. Legionaries also learned how to dodge enemy spears. This was vital for their survival. Ultimately, the pilum was not just a weapon. It was a symbol of the Roman military machine. It was proof that the Romans understood the importance of not only strength, but also intelligence. They were the first to turn warfare into a precise science, where every element mattered. And that was what brought them victory. The effectiveness of the pilum was proven in numerous battles. For example, in the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, the Romans used pilums to pierce the shields of the enemy Gauls. The Gauls, who had light shields, could not withstand the onslaught of the pilums. They were forced to throw down their shields and fight without protection, which made them vulnerable. This allowed the Romans to defeat them easily. The pilum was also very effective against cavalry. When a cavalryman attempted to attack, legionaries could throw a pilum at him. The pilum could knock him off his horse or cause damage. This forced cavalrymen to keep their distance. Roman commanders such as Julius Caesar understood the importance of the pilum. They used it as a tool to disrupt enemy formations. They knew that if the enemy lost their formation, they would become easy targets. Therefore, they always began the battle with a mass volley of pilums. Ultimately, the pilum was not just a weapon, but part of Roman military strategy. It was what made the Roman army so powerful. It was proof that the Romans understood the importance of not only strength, but also intelligence. They were the first to turn warfare into a precise science, where every element mattered. Discipline was the main weapon of the Roman army. Legionnaires were trained to carry out orders without delay. This was especially important in defending the camp. Every legionnaire knew his place, his task, and his commander. There was no chaos or confusion. There was only coordinated and well-organized work. The Romans also used a system of signals. The sounds of trumpets and horns gave commands. Legionnaires knew all these signals. This communication system was vital for managing a huge army. It allowed commanders to respond quickly to changing situations. Discipline in the Roman army was at the highest level. It was achieved through constant training and a strict hierarchy. Each legionnaire was obliged to obey his commander, who in turn obeyed his commander, and so on, up to the commander-in-chief. This system allowed the army to be managed as a single organism, where each element worked in unison. If anyone failed to obey an order, they faced severe punishment. The signaling system was an integral part of this discipline. The sounds of trumpets and horns gave commands on the march, in battle, and in camp. Each sound had its own meaning. For example, one sound could mean attack, another retreat, and a third take up defensive positions. Legionnaires knew all these signals and could carry them out without delay. This communication system was vital for managing a huge detachment. It allowed commanders to respond quickly to changing situations and give orders without having to shout. Discipline was just as important in camp as it was in battle. The camp followed a strict daily routine. In the morning, the legionaries got up at the signal, had breakfast, and went about their duties. During the day, they trained, and in the evening, they rested. All this was part of their life, and they were used to this order. This discipline helped them maintain their morale and be ready for any challenges. The Romans also used a system of control. Centurions kept an eye on their legionnaires, and commanders kept an eye on their centurions. If anyone broke the rules, they'd be punished. The punishments were really harsh, ranging from physical punishment to more severe ones, even execution. This system of control kept things in order and prevented chaos. All of this was part of Roman military philosophy. The Romans did not rely on chance, but always prepared for the worst. They knew that the most important thing in war was survival. Their army was a well-organized military machine, and that was what brought them victory. But if the Romans were so disciplined that even trumpets gave them signals, what made them so organized? Stay with us. The answer will amaze you. The Roman army was divided into small units, centuries and cohorts. A century consisted of about 80 legionaries, and a cohort consisted of 6 centuries. This division allowed for effective management of the army and distribution of tasks. In the defense of the camp, each century was responsible for its own section of the rampart. The centurion, the commander of the centuria, was an experienced and proven warrior who was responsible for his men. He monitored their discipline, training, and well-being. Centurions were the heart of the Roman army. They were the ones who led the legionaries into battle and were responsible for their lives. The structure of the Roman army was pyramidal. The basis was the centuria, which consisted of 80 legionaries led by a centurion. 2 centuria formed a manipulus, and 3 manipuli formed a cohort of about 480 men. 10 cohorts made up a legion, which numbered about 5,000 men. This structure made it easy to manage huge masses of people. Each unit had its own functions. In the defense of the camp, each centuria was responsible for its own section of the rampart. It had to not only defend it, but also ensure that it was in good condition. This allowed the Romans to defend themselves quickly and effectively against enemies. The centurion was not just a commander, but a mentor and father to his soldiers. He trained them, monitored their health, and helped them solve problems. He was the one who was responsible for his people. If a legionnaire died, the centurion had to answer for why it happened. Therefore, they were very responsible. The structure of the army was very flexible. It allowed commanders to easily move troops from one place to another. If one section of the rampart was attacked, the commander could quickly transfer several cohorts there. This allowed the Romans to respond to changing situations and defeat their enemies. There were also other units in the legion: cavalry, engineers, and scouts. They all had their own functions and worked together as a single mechanism. The cavalry was used for reconnaissance and pursuing the enemy, engineers for building camps and siege structures, and scouts for gathering information about the enemy. Ultimately, the Roman army was a well-organized military machine. Its structure was thought out down to the smallest detail, which allowed it to defeat enemies who had numerical superiority. It was proof that the Romans understood the importance of not only strength, but also intelligence. It was what brought them victory. This strict hierarchy and clear structure were the result of centuries of military experience. The Romans did not simply copy other people's tactics, they improved them. The system of centuries and cohorts allowed them to be very mobile and adapt to any situation. If it was necessary to divide the legion into several parts to pursue the enemy, it was easy to do. If it was necessary to combine several cohorts for an assault, it was also easy to do. In addition, the centurion was not only a commander, but also a link between the ordinary legionaries and the high command. He conveyed orders and could also pass on information about the condition of his men. This allowed the command to be aware of all events and make the right decisions. Roman commanders understood that success depended on every soldier. Therefore, they invested enormous resources in training and preparation. Legionnaires trained every day to perfect their skills. They learned not only how to wield weapons, but also how to march in formation, build camps, and perform other tasks. This structure was so strong that it lasted for hundreds of years. It was what allowed the Roman Empire to exist for so long. It was a symbol of their strength, their power, and their will to win. Roman legionaries were not only soldiers, but also engineers. Each legionary carried a shovel, pickaxe, and other tools. These were used to build camps, dig trenches, and construct siege engines. These tools were part of their equipment and were as important as their swords. These tools were vital for defending the camp. They allowed the legionaries to quickly erect fortifications and defend themselves against enemies. Without these tools, the Romans would not have been able to build their temporary fortresses. A Roman legionary was a versatile soldier. He was trained not only to fight, but also to build. This skill was vital for survival. Shovels, pala, picks, dolabra, and baskets, corbis, were all part of his equipment. These tools were as important as his sword, gladius, and shield, scutum. Legionnaires carried them with them along with their weapons and armor. This made their equipment heavy, but it was necessary. The tools were used to build the camp. When the legion stopped for the night, every soldier set to work. Some dug a moat, others built a rampart, and still others pitched tents. All this was done quickly and smoothly, as if they were a single organism. In a few hours, a real fortress grew up where there had been a field just a short time before. This was only possible thanks to the tools that each legionnaire carried with him. In addition to building camps, the tools were also used for other purposes. For example, when besieging cities, legionnaires built siege engines, tunnels, and other structures. They could dig tunnels under the walls to bring them down. They could build siege towers to climb the walls. All this would have been impossible without tools. Tools were also used in battle. For example, a pickaxe could be used to destroy enemy fortifications. Legionnaires could use it to break through gates or destroy walls. It was not only a tool, but also a weapon. Roman commanders understood the importance of tools. They made sure that every legionnaire had them. If someone lost their tool, they would be punished. Tools were part of their lives and were as important as their swords. Ultimately, a Roman legionnaire was not just a warrior, but a universal soldier. He was trained not only to fight, but also to build. This skill was vital for survival. It was what made the Roman army so powerful. It was not just an army, but a well-organized military machine. And that was what brought them victory. This versatility was part of a legionnaire's training. From the very beginning of their service, they learned not only how to use weapons, but also how to perform engineering tasks. They learned how to dig a trench, how to build a rampart, how to erect tents. This was vital as there were no specialist engineers in the field. Each legionnaire was his own engineer. These skills were especially important when the army was far from home. If a bridge was destroyed, the legionaries could build a new one. If a road was blocked, they could clear it. If a camp was needed, they could build it in a few hours. This independence allowed the Roman army to be very mobile. Roman tools were very durable and reliable. They were made of high-quality iron and wood, which made them long-lasting. Legionnaires took great care of their tools as their lives depended on them. Losing a tool could mean being unable to complete a task, which could have serious consequences. The importance of tools was evident in every aspect of military life. For example, during the construction of a camp, legionnaires used tools for marking. With the help of a plumb line, they marked out the main streets and perimeter. This allowed them to build the camp according to strict rules, making it ideal for defense. This versatility of the Roman legionary was one of the main advantages of the Roman army. They were not just warriors, but masters of all trades. This was what made them invincible. The entire camp defense system was based on precise calculations. The Romans knew how long it would take to dig a moat of a certain depth, how many people were needed to build a rampart, and how long it would take to build a gate. They used simple but effective mathematics to calculate everything down to the smallest detail. This allowed them to always be one step ahead of the enemy. They were the first to turn war into an exact science. Roman engineers, agrimensors, were true masters of their craft. They used simple but accurate tools such as the gromma to mark out the main streets and perimeter of the camp. The gromma was a wooden cross with plumb lines that allowed them to mark right angles. With its help, the Romans could create perfect squares and rectangles, which was vital for planning. Mathematics was used at every stage of construction. For example, the Romans knew that a certain number of legionnaires would be needed to dig a certain section of the moat. They calculated how much earth needed to be dug up and how long it would take. This allowed them to plan their work and not waste time. The whole system was similar to a modern construction project where every step was calculated down to the smallest detail. The Romans also used mathematics to distribute their forces. They knew that a certain number of legionnaires would be needed to defend a certain section of the rampart. They calculated how many people were needed to defend the gates and how many to defend the walls. This allowed them to use their forces effectively and not waste them. The whole system was very precise. Mathematics was also used in battle. The Romans knew that to win, they needed not only strength, but also tactics. They used mathematics to calculate the distance to the enemy, their speed of movement, and the direction of the wind. This allowed them to use their throwing weapons, such as pilums, with maximum effectiveness. They knew when to throw the pilums so that they would reach their target. The Romans also used mathematics to build siege engines. They calculated the height of siege towers, the length of siege ladders, and the force of the battering ram. This allowed them to build effective siege engines that could destroy enemy walls. The whole system was very precise. This precision in calculation was evident even in the smallest details. For example, the Romans knew how much food and water each legionnaire needed per day. They calculated how much supplies they would need on the march and how much to leave in the camp. This was vital, as without food, the army would not be able to fight. They also used mathematics to distribute provisions. Each soldier received his share, and no one could get more or less. This system was very accurate. Roman engineers also used mathematics to build aqueducts. They calculated the slope so that water would flow by gravity. They knew how to build bridges and tunnels so that water could reach cities. All this would have been impossible without accurate calculations. Even in seemingly simple things, such as forming a battle line, mathematics was present. Legionnaires knew how much space each soldier should occupy so as not to interfere with their neighbor, while ensuring maximum density of the battle line. This allowed them to create impenetrable walls of shields. This system was so effective that it was also used in peacetime. The Romans used mathematics to build roads, bridges, and other structures. They were the first to understand that mathematics was the key to progress. The secret to the Roman survival was not their bravery or strength, but their ability to plan and organize. They did not rely on luck, but always prepared for the worst. Their camps were impregnable fortresses, and their army was a well-organized military machine. The Romans understood that the main thing in war was not to defeat the enemy, but to prevent them from defeating you. Their camp defense system was proof of this. It allowed them to survive in the most difficult conditions and defeat enemies who had numerical superiority. The secret of Roman invincibility lay in the details. While other armies relied on surprise, numbers, or savagery, the Romans built their victory on a foundation of logistics and engineering. They understood that without food, water, and reliable shelter, even the bravest warriors would be doomed. The castrum was the pinnacle of this philosophy. It turned any overnight stop into a strategic advantage. When enemies watched legionnaires erect a fortified camp in a matter of hours, they saw not just workers, but harbingers of their defeat. The speed and coordination of their actions were part of psychological warfare. This kind of organization was foreign to many barbarian tribes accustomed to chaotic raids. They realized that they were facing an army that played by its own rules. This caused them to doubt their own strength and demoralize them even before the battle began. Roman commanders, such as Julius Caesar, masterfully exploited this advantage. They could set up camp in a location inconvenient for the enemy, on top of a hill or across a river, and force them to attack under unfavorable conditions. They did not rush into battle, but waited until the enemy lost patience and fell into the trap. It was like a game of chess, where every move was calculated in advance. The tools that each legionnaire carried were as important a weapon as the gladius. Shovels, pickaxes, and baskets allowed them not only to build camps, but also to erect siege engines, dig tunnels under the walls of enemy cities, and even change the course of rivers. This versatility made their army incredibly flexible and adaptable. In any situation, they could react quickly and gain an advantage. The system of division into centuries and cohorts was another element that made the Roman army so effective. It allowed commanders to easily manage huge masses of people and quickly transfer forces to the right place. This was especially important in defending the camp. where each centuria was responsible for its own section of the rampart. This structure eliminated chaos and confusion, which was a key factor in battle. Thus, the Romans did not win because they were the strongest. They won because they were the smartest. They turned war into a precise science where every detail mattered. They did not rely on chance, but always prepared for the worst. Their camps were impregnable fortresses, their army a well-organized military machine. And that was what brought them victory. We have come to the end of our journey through the world of Roman military logistics. But there is still so much more to discover in history. What do you think was the most surprising thing about this system? Perhaps you were impressed by the sophistication of the road network, or conversely, you did not expect fleet management to be part of military strategy? Tell us about it in the comments. We have looked at how the Romans fed their army and capital, but there are many other equally fascinating questions beyond this topic. For example, how did Roman medicine function during campaigns? What technologies were used to build siege engines? Or how were the triumphal processions, which were the culmination of military victory, organized? Write your ideas for future videos in the comments, and we will definitely discuss the most interesting ones. And if you like this video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new episodes.